Hey guys, welcome to the Launchpad, and thanks for joining me with the rest of the Rehab Rebels. If you don't already know, the Rehab Rebels are on a mission to launch out of the rat race, and we're committed to doing it together. If entrepreneurship, real estate, and passive income mean as much to you as they do to us, then you're in the right place. Sit back, buckle up, and prepare for launch. If you're enjoying our episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the Launchpad and like us on Spotify. Just tap one of the links below. By subscribing, you'll get new episodes delivered straight to your library every week. Welcome to the show. Today, I am sitting down with David Van Noy of the Van Noy Group. David, if you've lived in Kansas City for any amount of time, you've probably seen his real estate signs in yards all over the Kansas City area. It's a black sign with a red V. And David and I met at Reese Nichols almost 10 years ago. And he has been a dynamic, powerful figure that I have learned a lot from over the years. And he's on the show today because he has an invaluable insight into what's going on in today's real estate climate with changes in the NAR lawsuit. And David is, he's a seasoned business owner who has built not only a successful real estate reputation and career, but also a thriving business. And he has a lot of insights for any entrepreneur, and especially any salesperson who is selling real estate or anything for that matter. So a lot of life lessons in today's episode. And without further ado, welcome David Van Noy. Hey guys, I'm here today with David Van Noy of Van Noy Group Company.
Van Noy Real Estate.
Van Noy Real Estate.
Yeah.
David Van Noy and I have known each other for several years now. We first met out at Reese Nichols in Leawood. What was that, maybe 9
World
10
headquarters,
years ago?
probably 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, yep. So David is, he's one of the premier realtors in the Kansas City area. He's just recently launched his own business. He left Reese Nichols after years of success there. And he's joining us today with some insight into some of the changes with the NAR lawsuit and some of those legal changes that are happening in the real estate world. So David's a great guy to speak on that subject.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty hot topic right now. I'd be interested to hear. I'm trying to find content on that myself, going through the nuance, finding out what people are doing, finding out what people are nervous about, what they're anxious about, how they're going to take advantage of all the things that are happening right now. So I'm kind of really entrenched in this over the past couple weeks, going through the agreements and all the legislation and all those types of things to figure out what's going to happen.
So let's go back to the beginning of your career and kind of talk about how did you get into real estate in the first place?
I kind of stumbled into real estate. My family was in the restaurant business. I worked in the restaurants my whole life. I thought I'd be there my whole life. When I was about 20 years old, I met the real estate agent that was selling my parents' house. And he kind of just took a liking to me. And I was really unsure about why he took a liking to me, but he encouraged me that I could get a license, and it was easy. And it was easy to get a license. Keeping one and thriving is a different story. But yeah, so it was just random that I ended up with his team.
And your folks owned Jess and Jim's and RCs, is that right?
My grandfather started Jess and Jim's, or took over Jess and Jim's from the bank in like 1957. So, and I grew up in that area, in the Martin City area. And, they've been in the restaurant business for a long time.
How old were you when you started working there?
That's when I feel like I met my father, when I got to go to work with him when I was about 12, and I'd sweep the floors. But I legitimately had like a full-time position there by 14.
That's
and
funny
that's
funny that you say you feel like you met your dad when you were 12 years old.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Entrepreneur, he's
Yeah.
in there grinding all through your childhood.
Yeah, he was at work a lot. And yeah, of course, when I was a kid, I thought that he should be at home. And once I got to be about 14, I just wanted to go where he was, and work was pretty cool.
So you're working at RC's or
Yeah.
Jess and Jim's as a 13-year-old?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, mostly at RC's. I worked at Jess and Jim's as well, but I grew up working at RC's for the most part.
What do you think that experience taught you as a business owner now?
That's interesting. I've actually revisited that a little bit. I was kind of forced into a leadership role at a young age, 17, 18 years old, and it was nepotism at that point because I was just in charge of people because my dad owned the place.
What's nepotism mean?
That means that you receive favor based on the fact that your parents or your family owns the business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that like get under your skin, having come from people that parents that are successful?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was accused of having a silver spoon when I was 15 years old, but then I was kicked out of the business essentially with zero money in my pocket and had to go build my own business. So I don't have a chip on my shoulder anymore. But for sure, when I was young, it was like, yeah, look, the only reason you have anything is because you're dad.
Yeah. That could be, you hear that story repeated from various people living in their dad's shadow. I mean, that could be a difficult way to go. How did you work your way through that emotionally?
You have to have your own accomplishment. So there was two important things, and it might sound negative, but it's not. One is he was not very intent on making my life easy. So he made me work harder than any of the other employees. So even though they felt like I had a leg up and I had a silver spoon, and in some ways I did, it didn't buy me favor with him. I worked more than anybody else around, and I didn't get much credit for it either. And so that will take a lot of it out.
Elon Musk says that owning a business is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. Do you feel like that work ethic that he instilled in you, your dad, prepared you for the eating glass of business ownership?
I mean, I think that's a pretty interesting way to describe it. I find business to be difficult in the best ways. So like I tell my trainer, because I like to work out 3-4 days a week with a trainer, and I can never get it right. I can never really get my diet where I want it to be. I can never really get my and I tell him if it wasn't this difficult, I wouldn't be interested. And I think business is the same way. It's so consistently difficult and out of reach in so many ways that it maintains my interest.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
So we talked before this, and you told me a little bit about some mentors that you had. So can you tell us about how you found those mentors? And I noticed that you were very intentional in that relationship with them.
Yeah, I think we had that good conversation about mentorship. I think that what I should probably preface it with is I always really had a high level of respect for people that were doing it. Mm-hmm. And that means like, when I was young in the business, and I don't know if it's this way now anymore, it doesn't feel like it to me, but when I was a young real estate agent, anybody that was doing business was cool to me. And I wanted to hang around them and see what they were doing and ask them questions. And I mean, I was the guy that would sit outside of somebody's office and listen to them talk on the phone. And I mean, I have a friend still that I talked to last week, Susie Goldstein, who's a real estate agent in Kansas City for, probably 45 years. And I had a conversation with her just as recently as last week saying, I can remember sitting outside of your office listening to you work on deals. And so I found mentors based on the fact that I had a high level of respect for all those people, and I wanted to be like them.
You told me that you would make a habit of contacting people and letting them be a part of decision making as you run into problems in your business and challenges and the next frontier. How did that go? Is that phone calls? How did you engage them and make them a part of your business?
Well, I trust people that are in my circle to help me make decisions. I have a high level of humility when it comes to making big decisions. And I say that because before I do anything, I'm going to reach out to trusted people. Now, when I go to deliver the message to the world and say, this is my position on something, I've thought about it, I've researched it, I've asked smart people, and I feel, so some people might perceive that as confidence, and it is, but it's not blind confidence. It comes from doing the research, making sure I know the right answers. And when I get to the table with someone, I'm going to know exactly what I think about it.
That's your board of directors.
Oh, that's a good way to say it. Yeah. I used to call it a board of advisors.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, so I didn't think about this, but this is to what you're speaking to. I actually went back in 2010 and purposefully selected a board of advisors, invited them to a lunch, told them you're on the board of advisors.
That's awesome.
And I still have the notes from that meeting where I asked them all a series of questions about what they thought about my business, how to receive more referrals, and just basically, what do you think about the way I'm branding myself?
That sounds like one of those pivotal moments. So that was in 2010?
Yeah.
What happened in 2010 and 2011? What became the fruit of that?
You know what I think's most pivotal there is in 2010. I started selling in 2003. In 2010, I actually did what I considered taking a step back, and I joined another agent at the time who was a top 25 producer. And I went backwards in theory and joined a team. And he had some of these ideas about how to build my business. And he said, get a board of advisors, read these books, prepare yourself for this part. And he was everything that I wasn't in regards to organizing my business. I was all charisma and personality before that, which I'd come to find out that people didn't really appreciate as much as I thought they did. And they care more about you technically. Well, my brand now is I'm technically good at the job. Not that I'm not friendly or charismatic, but
Right.
I don't lead with it the same way.
So what are some things that came out of that change? You got your board of directors. You're opening yourself up to the humility of asking for advice. Did you take the advice that you got? What kind of advice did you get?
Almost always, yeah. The message I received over a certain period of time was more skill, less ego.
Okay.
More service, less bravado.
And that's got to be tough to hear. If that's just a part of it, you're a charismatic guy. And to hear that,
Yeah.
how did you take that?
I think I give that message to people now, and it reminds me of how I received it the first time I got it. When you receive a message like that and you need to hear it, it feels like they don't know me. They don't understand me. They don't know what it's like to be me. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, I believe if you find yourself experiencing that kind of feeling, that's how you know you need to look at it. It's like somebody saying you're fat. Now, if somebody says you're fat and you're just not fat, it doesn't even affect you. You don't even consider it. You're like, they couldn't come up with something better than that. But if you're fat and someone says you're fat, it'll get in your head for a week.
Well, how do you curb charisma, though? Because it's a strength. It's an attribute. So what do you do to shore it up?
I don't curb it. I put it where it belongs, and I don't lead with it. So
give me an example.
So
How does that work?
if I walk into a car dealership today and I have questions about the car I'm going to buy, and I say I have questions about this make and this model, and I want to talk about the price, and he says, "Hey, buddy, oh, good to see you. What kind of dog do you have? My kids are this age. That's a really good looking sweater you got on there. Where'd you buy those shoes?" Right?
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Right, so that's leading with charisma, and I would call it forcing rapport.
And it feels phony. You
is phony.
You know what they're up to.
Yeah, it is phony.
Okay, so you don't lead with it,
right?
But you don't exclude it.
Yeah.
So how do you bring?
I was raised as a host of a restaurant, so I was a host. Mm-hmm. When people would walk in, I would greet them with all that. How you doing tonight? Yeah, that's what they expect there.
Yeah.
In the real estate business now, for me, of course we're friendly. Of course I love to chop it up, and I love charisma. I love getting along with people. But I find that as a practitioner, almost like a doctor or a lawyer, or someone that people generally actually have respect for, you walk in with, this is the job what we're trying to accomplish here. Let's talk about exactly what we're doing. And if jokes come up, great. I love that.
Yeah. It just sounds like a lot more natural approach. And you could build rapport with people that way, rather than hitting them over the head with it, and it just comes off as phony.
Yeah, you're trying to force it.
Yeah. So you did some coaching, and you got involved with a group around the country, right?
Yeah, Mike Ferry is a real estate coach for nearly 50 years, mm-hmm. and I joined to be coached in 2013. And a few years later, I became a coach of other agents, and I still coach and consult with a group of agents around the country still.
The thing that struck me about you telling me that is that it sounds like you even learned more from being a coach than you did from getting coached. Talk to us about that. What were some things that you saw that were commonalities among your students that people were screwing up on? And you were able to see that 50,000-foot view and see what everyone's doing wrong, and it just became clear to you. What are some of those things?
Well, when you're in your own business and you're trying to grow it, all you can see is how you perceive things. When you take a group of, and at the height of my coaching, I would work with up to 20 agents at a time. And what happens is you start to recognize the same excuses over everybody.
And what were they? What are some of the common ones?
Everybody had their own story about why they weren't achieving something, and it made sense to them. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at the people that were reaching their goals, and I looked at the people that were not reaching their goals, it was simply boiled down to the story they were telling themselves.
How did they differ?
Well, the person who wasn't achieving their goals was really married to a story that they weren't the type of person that would normally achieve goals. And the person that was achieving their goals was really focused on doing it and didn't really have a lot of questions or concerns about what would happen if they didn't.
Is it courage?
That's not the word I would choose. It's courageous, I suppose. Is courage what I observed in the people?
Is that the differentiating factor?
Here's the way I would say this. I've recognized in the real estate industry specifically, it's not the smartest people, always. Being smart helps, but it's typically not the smartest people. When I was asked this by one of the leaders of the largest real estate companies in Kansas City, he said, "What do you think it takes? And how do you think you know when you see someone that's going to make it and someone that's not?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "You give me somebody that's been told that they're not good enough for a long period of time, but is persistently pursuing the idea that it's not true. That's the person I'll take."
Tenacity.
Yeah, just a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah.
How about this? The only reason that you're successful is because your family has a restaurant.
Yeah. And you've had enough of hearing that. So. It's time to prove yourself.
Yeah.
You have to have that chip on your shoulder.
That's
a little
right.
bit of a chip.
That's right. I prefer that.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't have a chip, you can't manufacture that.
Yeah.
You can't manufacture it and give them that angst.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Rocky. He had, I don't know what his chip was, but he definitely had a chip, whatever it was.
Well, he was kind of stupid. He talked funny.
Right,
and that was
that's
his
right.
Yeah, and honestly, Rocky, his story was Sylvester Stallone's story.
Yeah.
Because Sylvester Stallone, they wouldn't put him in any movies, and they wouldn't write it. They wouldn't make his movies. They'd read the script and say, "This is too basic."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, "I'll make my own movie then."
Yeah.
I mean, that's the story of Rocky.
Yeah. And that just his spirit was so palpable in that movie. I mean, it just resonates with an entrepreneur.
The underdog.
It's fun to be in that position, you know?
Well, people enjoy an underdog, and they enjoy seeing you build your way up. And once you get there, they really enjoy tearing your ass down too. Big time.
So you have earned yourself a reputation for a top negotiator. What can you teach us about negotiations?
Well, that's interesting. And a reputation for being a top negotiator, I think that's a nice way to say that people think I'm a jerk in our business. No, I say it that way because I find that people misunderstand doing a good job for your client in our business differently than they would as an attorney or an attorney. I think is a great one because I think attorneys, they fight hard for their client and they can have a beer with each other after the trial's over. Real estate agents, we feel really like we absolutely have to tear everybody else down in order to build ourselves up, or at least that's my perception of the industry sometimes. But to be a top negotiator, you have to care about the person that you're creating the result for, and you have to stay really attached to that fiduciary obligation. So when people hire me, they say, "Gosh, that's tough. You're going to have to make that call," and they're not going to like that. They're not going to be happy. And that's usually the other side of a good negotiator is the emotion and the feelings and the reputation of the community. Mm-hmm. And I prefer to get along with people. I have really good friends even in the real estate business, but I choose my client and the deal and structuring the deal properly over that.
Was there ever a negotiation upset that you just got your rear end handed to you and you said, "Never again. I learned that lesson. I'm not going to get outfoxed on a negotiation like that again"? Were there some things that happened where you really learned some pivotal lessons?
We learn all the time through negotiations on personalities and how to deal with different personalities. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we look at as a company on how to make deals, how to keep them together, how to manage expectations, how to keep people happy. All that boils down to who are you dealing with, what's driving them, What do they care about?
Okay, so you have to understand their motivations. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm even talking about the real estate agents. So the buyer and the seller, they have motivations. A lot of times those are in the back seat because an agent has something to prove as they negotiate the deal. It's not really even about the deal. It's about you versus me. Yeah. We try to remove that, and because that is the worst thing you could add to a negotiation is your own personal emotion.
Is there a systematic way that you teach people to do it, or is it a gut feeling?
Yeah. This is an important thing in my business, that when we started to change this, we got a huge result, and that was removing the emotion. And so that was probably 2013. I can point to that when I got a coach personally who was working with us on get rid of all the emotions here. You lose a deal, let's move on. And what I coach in our agents at the company is stay focused on the result. It's not about you. Mm-hmm. And it's truly not. We have deals every single week. We have deals where I might, if I dig deep enough, have a personal affection towards not doing it or making the deal difficult or trying to get a dig in, to get even. And the truth is, I don't do that ever.
The business that you've been in is a sales business. What are some lessons and mistakes with sales in general?
That's such a good question because we forget that we're in a direct sales business completely. Uh-huh. And the fact of the matter is, if you're in a sales business, it's a numbers business. That means that you have to ask a certain amount of times a question and get a few yeses to those questions at our price point anyways to be successful.
So it's a numbers game.
Absolutely a numbers game.
KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you track KPIs?
Oh, yes. We have KPIs. We have critical numbers. We have smart numbers.
What are the KPIs in your business?
Well, the KPIs in any business are basically a unit of energy output versus income.
But specifically, are they phone calls? Are they emails? What are some of those key performance indicators?
So our system will track. We start with days worked. We go to hours prospected. Then we have amount of calls that you've made, amount of contacts that you've made, and you have to define contacts. So that's in our business, that's if you've made connection with a decision-making adult. Then you have appointments set, appointments attended, listings taken or buyers taken, if you will, and then closings.
And do you manage the conversion ratios of each on your staff? Are you looking at people's numbers to see how often they're winning the listing proposal?
Always. So we track all those numbers, and our system will track most of them, but we have some that they'll track themselves, and I track all of them. But as a coach for the agents with my company, or as a coach with the other agents I work with across the country, you tell me a problem or a challenging that you're having, I can make a correlation between two numbers and tell you exactly what you need to work on. And that's why we so if you come to me and say, I'm making X amount of calls, but I'm not setting enough appointments, well, then I know that it has to do with the conversion or the script or the way that you're closing over the phone. Mm-hmm. If you say I'm going on a ton of appointments, but I'm not converting to a listing taken, then it has to do with your presentation, your scripting, your ability to close in person, and maybe your individual mindset about what your goals actually are. And so through a series of probably 6 or 8 questions, I can tell you exactly what your challenge is.
And do you find that people typically struggle with one or the other? Is a person who's willing to make their phone calls more likely to close deals? Or do you find deal guys that can close deals and they just don't want to make the calls?
Wow, that's an interesting question. It's all types. So people have their own manifestation and at different times and at different forms of motivation for the salesperson, because you take give me a guy that's introverted, but his back's against a wall, his wife's pregnant, his bills are due, and that guy will figure out how to get in front of people and make 1 million calls. Mm-hmm. But if you take a guy that has got money in the bank, nowhere to be, but is extroverted and loves talking to people, but just won't make his calls. So it's not about the fact that he doesn't like to make the calls. He just avoids the work because it's difficult and there's rejection involved. The other guy will overcome anything because he has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really is case by case. So it makes it so interesting. And it keeps it really interesting for me because I have sales guys that I would think, God, this guy has everything that he needs to be successful. He just won't put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
I see that a lot.
Where are the call lists coming from? Where do you get your cold leads? Are they cold leads? Are they where are these coming from?
Yeah, we built our business as a cold call cowboy. That's
And you still are that way?
Not necessarily. A lot less than people might think. Now, you say, where do we get leads? Where do we get people? All different types of, it depends on the source of the lead. So I can give you a couple of high-level examples. We call expireds and for sale by owners. So if somebody's home comes off the market with another agent, we're going to call that lead. We have multiple sources to get that information.
Is everyone in Kansas City who has an expired listing going to get a call from the Van Noy Group?
Yeah, if you're in our window, yeah, you're going to get a call.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in Jackson and Johnson County, for sure. We have some other areas that we'll focus on in Cass, Miami, Platte as well, and certain price points. But for the most part, you'll probably receive at least 3 calls, a few texts, and 3 or 4 emails.
So besides the expired listings, are there any other data sources that you're getting contacts from?
Yeah, so that's a good follow-up because I find that a lot of people structure their business as a one-trick pony where they say, I'm going to call expireds. That's a great idea. I work with coaching clients all the time that are willing to call expireds, and I'll have to coach up the other side of their business, which is more profitable, which is the database. So you have to start with the fact that as a company, we believe that we do deals when we talk to people, period. So you could my coach used to teach me, if you run out of people to call the white pages. It doesn't matter who you talk to people about real estate, you're going to do deals. That's what's great about our business is everybody knows somebody or needs it themselves.
And you're able to track how many calls each person is putting out with your phone system?
To the second.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you're watching that. You have a dashboard readout on everyone.
Yeah, it's up on a big TV in our office, and you can see what everybody's done up to the minute.
And everyone has quotas?
Everybody has their own individual goals. So with those individual goals, you can see ratios that start to play out. So if a guy or gal comes in and makes 200 phone calls a day and sets 2 appointments a day, you can get pretty clear on what they're going to accomplish.
So there have been a lot of changes in the real estate world lately. There's the NAR lawsuit. Can you give us what is the essence of the NAR lawsuit?
Well, the non-boring summary of the lawsuit, I would say, is that they want to decouple commissions. So in the past, traditionally, commissions were 6% commission. And, generally speaking, agents would try to stick to a 6% commission, and they'd offer 3% to a buyer agent. And that's the way it's always been. Now, those commissions have come down a little bit, and I would say that in the past year or two, especially since COVID, I would see 5% commissions being a little bit more prominent, and then it would be whether or not the listing agent keeps 2 or keeps 2.5 and how much they share. So the lawsuit is basically targeting the fact that a listing agent is pre-negotiating a commission on behalf of a buyer agent before a transaction even happens. And the Department of Justice has basically agreed with the lawsuit that it's collusion or price fixing, and it's basically falsely holding buy-side commissions higher than necessary.
What are your opinions on that? You agree with it?
I'm a believer that the market should set things and the price of things. And so I love and I benefited from the idea that almost every buyer agent deserved 3%, which is the word they would use. I believe that the market should set the price. So if a seller goes to list a property and it has 5 offers in 5 minutes, which we've experienced, does it really make sense that the seller would pay a 3% commission to a buyer agent? In some cases, no. And so I just think you have to account for the fact that in some cases it's no. Now, some people would call me a traitor to the industry, and this is where people get mad at me because I believe as a company that I should solve people's problems at a price that makes sense to them and me, and not a guarantee that I receive as much money as I would like on every single deal just based on how much they've sold it for. Yeah. That's the crux of the issue.
Have these laws taken effect yet?
So the lawsuit has been settled and signed off on. The legislation has changed in a lot of states. Kansas and Missouri, our MLS will be pulling compensation field out of MLS next Wednesday. And so we're filming this today. What's today, Friday?
Yep.
Yeah, so what's today, the 9th?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think Wednesday's the 14th.
So the world's changing here in just a few days.
Big time, yeah. Well, not everybody thinks that, but I do.
So to that point, how's this going to affect buyer's agents and listing agents? But first, buyer's agents, because it sounds like this is the crux of it is really going to hit a buyer's agent.
Yeah.
Is it going to put them out of business? Can they survive it? How do they best navigate the situation?
Well, we have 14,500 real estate agents in Kansas City. All 14,500 of them will not make it. So I'll start with that. Most real estate agents survive in their business based on the idea that they can go out and represent mostly buyers, and that they can achieve most of the time between a 2.5% and 3% commission. Mm-hmm. So that was a really big leg up for people to be able to stay into the industry.
Absolutely.
The fact that I believe those commissions are going to come down, not because I think they need to, not because it's my idea to make them come down, and not because I'm going to be forcing it, but I believe that consumers are just going to be willing to pay less for that when they're in charge of the number, and that's what's going to happen.
Do you think it'll be possible to remain strictly a buyer's agent going into the new world?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think that there will be the incentive to be just a buyer's agent anymore. That was definitely a thing. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The people that said, I don't want to have to make a presentation to anybody. I don't want to have to ask them to pay me. I would just like to focus on taking people out and looking at properties, which I think is a skill. And there's agents that are very good at it. But I'd prefer never have to make a presentation and ask them for that commission. That's a buyer agent. Here's what changes. Now, every single person in the industry has to be able to make a good quality, high-level presentation to both sides, buyers and sellers. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to do that, then it doesn't make sense really to pick one side or the other. You need to represent people that need your help based on those things. I will say I don't believe that unskilled people will be eligible for commission anymore. And they were before. They were eligible. Mm-hmm. Because if they happened to open the door, they were guaranteed the commission that I put in MLS.
Yeah. So as a listing agent, which you focus primarily on listings, is the rest of your team focused on listings as well?
My company represents mostly buyers like most companies.
Okay.
I personally only represent listings.
Okay.
Or about 95% of the time.
Okay.
Occasionally I'll represent a buyer, but the 95% of my business is listings.
So how does this change the listing side? Does it make the listing side better, worse, the same?
The saying in our business has always been the case, and it's still the case, that if you list, you last. Mm-hmm. And I believe that if you're a real estate company, then you're a storefront, and you must have shelves filled with all types of inventory in order to survive.
Signs in yards, mailers out, open houses, flags on corners.
Product for sale. Mm-hmm. A home listed for sale is a product that you have. And that is a necessity in order to even be a business. So that should be every real estate agent's focus, is driving inventory. Now, I will argue on behalf of buyer's agents, if that's what you focus on, getting the client to sign an exclusive buyer's agency agreement with you is like taking a listing now. Mm-hmm. It's similar. But you negotiate that fee up front, you have that agreement in place, and then when they transact, you get paid. So now you should track your exclusive buyer's agency agreements the same way you would track a listing taken.
Mm-hmm. Are there any changes that you've made in your business to prepare for this change?
Oh yeah, a lot.
Like what? What are the top couple?
Well, the number one thing that we've really been focused on is how we're going to structure the agreements and how we're going to structure commission.
The buyer's agreement?
And sellers. Yeah, so we intend to go out and still pursue buyers, mm-hmm. and we intend to try to get them into an agreement to pay us a commission, probably somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. And in some cases, it may be difficult to. We're just going to have to see how that shakes out. I mean, we have 14,000 real estate agents. 9,000 of them might say, I'm going to charge 1%. I don't know. And if they do that, it becomes a difficult environment to work with buyers and represent them for a number that makes sense. It could be a very, very competitive market in that way for a while. Mm-hmm. On the listing side, I anticipate that our average commission is going to go up because we're really only negotiating now from our side to determine the commission that we receive as the listing company.
Right. You don't have to go in and saddle yourself with the burden of a 2.5 or 3% for the buy side also. You're just coming in on your listing side.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a conflict too. This is something that not everybody agrees with me on as far as real estate agents are concerned. I mean, I talk to agents that say it's business as usual for us. We're still going to go out and try to get a 5 or 6% commission, and we're going to negotiate the fee and try to share it with the cooperative agent. Now,
how does that work? Sounds like that's the same thing that it was before.
It is. Yeah, it is. No, it is. And they don't make any bones about the fact that they say it's business as usual. I have text messages right now from some top agents, a top agent in the city who said it's business as usual for me. I'm not changing the way I structure anything. I personally think that's naive, and I think it's not accurate.
Will it come back and bite them? Legally, I mean, is it possible to do it that way?
As a real estate team, you're too small to really be targeted. But yes, in the sense that the Department of Justice is going to reach into the MLS and say, you can't let people do that. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, maybe that person could get a couple $1,000 fine from the MLS. And that can put them in jail or no large fines like companies would get. But I think it's people just need to look at what the actual legislation is and what the Department of Justice is trying to say to us as a profession. Because to me, that part makes sense, and then your action should come after that. Mm-hmm. The values of it are clear. The values are, we want each agent to represent their fee structure to their own client. And that makes perfect sense to me. So if I go in and say, here's my fee, but let's go ahead and pre-negotiate the fee that I have in line for Tommy, then what's happening is that's where collusion happens. That's where price fixing happens. If I say every agent in town is going to expect us to pay a 3% commission, that's collusion. That's more a clean example of price fixing. Collusion would be when these agents come to me and say, if you don't pay 3%, we're not going to show your listings.
How do you get a contract signed on such an arrangement? Is that something that brokerages are going to put in .loop, and there's a base contract that has a clause there for setting the buy side commission? Is that something it's it's an amendment to the listing agreement? How do you paper it up properly if you are going to do business as usual?
You can't. You can't, and I think that's why they're sadly mistaken about the changes. And listen, they happen Wednesday. This may age really well, or it may age really poorly. My personal opinion is they're going to find out real fast that they're not negotiating it the way they thought they were, and they are only in a position to receive offers and negotiate the commission in the offer. There is no place in their listing agreements, and I've seen them. There's no place to put a buyer agent compensation, period. It's not there. And I've seen the company's agreements. I've seen the board forms. They don't want it handled that way.
Do you think the whole thing's better for consumers or worse? Is it going to add to complexity? Because I could see even I have a real estate license. I'm in the lending industry. I understand these things. I've sold a bunch of houses, and it's all a little bit confusing to me. For your average homeowner, it's like it's adding a lot of complexity, it seems.
I don't think so. I think we can present it in a way where it's not a big burden to them, and I'll tell you why. But I'm going to tell you who it's bad for. It's bad for first-time buyers.
Why?
Well, let me give a more specific example. A first-time buyer, let's say, who has Google and thinks that they have a good understanding of how to transact a real estate deal, they might technically know the things to look out for, but I know from 21 years in the business, there's nuance. There's nuance to the conversation. There's nuance to what's customary. Mm-hmm. There's nuance to how do you ask for something versus what you can get, what you can't, when to ask for it, how to wait until you should ask for it. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's so hyper nuanced that nobody can do it except me, but you can be really good at it and you can be bad at it.
You're saying people might, a first-time buyer might get a false sense of security and trusting in their knowledge based off the internet and thinking they know everything.
Well, they may just decide to not take representation because it's expensive.
And that's an option?
It's always been an option.
So they submit their offer to the listing agent on their own?
Yeah, and let's be clear, that's always been an option. So, and this is what some purists would argue on the other side, is the lawsuit is wrong because you've always had the option to negotiate your commission, and you've always had the option to go for sale by owner or just approach a listing agent and say, I want to buy the house without an agent. You could always do that. Mm-hmm. Just most people didn't. And I would argue, again, to the other side, most people didn't because there was no incentive. The 3% was baked in. I might as well have this guy show me the house because the commission's already in the deal.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you could argue both sides of that, but the long and short of it is, new first-time buyer says, I think I've got this thing figured out. Or let's say they say, I want a real estate agent to represent me. Mm-hmm. And they decide to hire one. And the listing agent and the listing company's not providing any fee to the co-broker. Mm-hmm. And then what, they have to come up with that 3% out of pocket? I think that's bad. If it's in the deal versus out of pocket, that we could get into the individual debate on if that's good or bad. But there's people that are going to be harmed based on the fact that they're going to avoid representation.
So stepping away from all of this conversation, what would your advice be to realtors that are out there that don't have a big operation like yours, that want to best traverse these choppy waters? What's your advice to them?
I can tell you that I didn't used to think about it this way, and the way I think about it now that I think serves me the best with consumers is stop believing that you're owed anything on a transaction or that someone specifically owes you a certain amount of money based on a purchase price. So if you're adding value to a transaction, I find personally, that's how much I'm paid. And so there are some deals. I put a deal together this week where I was paid a flat fee of $2,000. I negotiated a deal this week that could pay me up to $80,000.
Wow.
The truth is, it makes sense to me and everybody involved why both of those fees were exactly what they were. Mm-hmm. So as an agent, though, what I find is people get offended by the idea that someone could look at it logically and say, this is how much we believe your service is worth. If you're not being paid what you think you deserve, add more value.
That's the free market theory anyways.
It should be.
And it does sound like the lawsuit decision was correct because it's just too much price fixing.
Correct or not correct. I don't know if let's change the word from correct to understandable. Mm-hmm. So you look at Selling Sunset and real estate agents of New York, and the common perception of a real estate agent is these people are making millions of dollars to fancy around and fluff pillows. I mean, it's the industry has asked for this.
Yeah.
It appears to be pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so we could be more professional, a little less boisterous about the work that we do, and probably receive more respect from, consumers.
Sure. So back to a business perspective, what are some things that are on the horizon for the Van Noy Group? What are you trying to do in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm purposefully a small company. We don't focus on recruiting because I've never focused on recruiting. We acquire talented people when it makes sense to, and when we have excess opportunity that requires adding more people. So I have, 10 licenses under my company and a few staff members on our leadership team that service those agents. I think naturally, just based on the work that we do and the market share that I expect to create, and the approach that we have in helping the agents, coaching them, and practicing real estate in a way that makes sense, 5 years, I expect that the company will be 10 times bigger. Mm-hmm. And not because that's necessarily what I have to have. I just think that will make sense.
And what's your target market?
For an agent?
For a seller?
I work really hard to not be typecast as an agent. I like the idea that you might see a sign of mine in Mission or Parkville or Lee Summit or Leawood, and if my sign is in front of a house for $150,000 or $3.5 million, it wouldn't be confusing to anybody. So I don't know, and geographically, I'm at 87th and State Line. I consider that to be right in the center of where we service, everywhere from North Kansas City to Lewisburg to Lone Jack and all the way out to DeSoto now. So geographically, we're more demographically working with people that prefer to work with professional people.
And regardless of the price point, what are some things that people can depend on receiving with the Van Noy Group if they're going to list with you? What are those value adds that you're going to put on every single listing, regardless of the price?
From a marketing standpoint, or just from a service standpoint?
From a service standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I think it should probably go without saying, if somebody hires me, they're going to receive data and they're going to receive their options versus my rhetoric or my accolades. So if you receive a packet of information at your house and I'm asking you to hire me, it's not going to mention any of the homes that we've sold or how many awards we've won or how many millions of dollars we've made selling real estate. The packet is going to be about what you need to do to achieve your goals and how we specifically intend to help you with that. So that's exactly why I think people hire me, is because I'm going to be straightforward about what it's going to take to get the job done.
Okay. And for anyone watching who wants to use your services, where can they find you? Where should they go to check you guys out?
Well, you can find me on any social media stuff, but Van Noy RE is our flagship website, and you can contact us there.
Okay. All right. Well, David, it's been a pleasure having you today. You've given us a lot of insight into what's going on in the market. Your personal story of just your childhood and growing up with entrepreneurs, building a business, it's inspirational for me. Our audience is mostly entrepreneurs, whether it's investors, real estate remodelers. All of them have a small business of some form or another. So I think a lot of people will get a lot more than you think out of your story of perseverance and building something out of nothing.
So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man.
And
Always
love
good.
to have you back.
Always
eventually.
good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Hey, Rebels. We'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to rate and review the Launchpad. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. We'd love to talk with you about how we can help, whether that's financing your next deal or partnering with us as a passive investor. If you have any questions or would like to learn more, leave us a comment and one of our team will reach out to you.